Hello and welcome everyone to the second session of the Building Safety Act 2022 CPD series provided and presented by the Institution of Structural Engineers. This session is being recorded for reference and sharing purposes. CPD is crucial for structural engineers as it ensures they remain up to date with evolving industry standards, technologies, and regulations. With the introduction of the Building Safety Act 2022, structural engineers must stay informed about new safety protocols, risk management practices, and legal responsibilities. The legislation places a strong emphasis on accountability, transparency, and compliance with safety standards, particularly for high-rise residential buildings. It introduces new requirements for risk assessment, increased scrutiny of building design, and heightened responsibilities throughout the building's life cycle. The legislation would shape how we approach building safety, requiring a more rigorous, collaborative, and accountable approach in our practice. This series are prepared and presented by the structural engineers within the Southeast Super region in the UK, comprising 4 hubs as annotated on the map. The light purple area on this map shows where we are, who we are, and how we can support our members. For help and support on technical matters, CPDs, webinar, trainings, and courses, and many more, please visit the institution's website or contact the HQ. For those who would like to watch the first session or missed it, it is uploaded and available on the institution's YouTube channel. Please note the topics and dates that will be presented in due course. Please book your place soon as the number of the attendees is limited. Please send questions via text message box, which will be answered either during or after the session. Without further delay, I hand over to Chris to introduce himself and show his presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can all see that in full screen. There's been some problems with that. So a bit of an introduction about myself. I'm Chris O'Regan. I am a Associate Director of a practice known as Mason Devereux Pledge, based in Hitchin, but I'm actually in the London office today. I'm going to be talking to you about competency and what that means, what the Building Safety Act believes it to be, and how it affects us as construction professionals, for which we all are. This session is going to be split into essentially 2 halves. First of all, what the Building Safety Act is defines as, or understands, or demands of us in terms of competency. And the second half is really about how the Institution of Structural Engineers, and indeed the Institution of Civil Engineers, or more importantly, but more relevantly, how the Engineering Council is actually addressing competency in a rather unique way. So, from the end of this course, today's course, Learning Outcomes, this is the hoped what you get from today's session. Understand what is meant by competence under the Building Safety Act. How to demonstrate competence, so you'll have an understanding of what that is, how one demonstrates competence. Recognize the HRB Competency Register for structural engineers. Some of you listening or watching or have you this presentation will be aware of this, but I'm going to go into great detail about what that really is, and understand the process of becoming a registrant within the HRB Competency Register. So you'll know about that at the end of this talk. So exciting things. So what I'm going to be talking about, how I'm going to deliver all this information to you. Well, first thing I'm going to go in definition of terms. I'm going to be using acronyms and terminologies and phrases, which I just want to bottom out from the outset before we go into the detail of this session. Then we're going to talk about the Building Safety Act requirement to prove one's competence. It's interesting, when I was developing these these slides, I actually originally had this as definition, but quite frankly, that's a rather nebulous phrase, definition of competence. It all depends on what kind of competence you're looking for. So instead, I've focused on the requirement that one has to prove one's competence. And then we talk about legal sanctions. I'm sorry to go into those realms, but this is quite important. Competence is actually tied to legal sanctions. Then introduction to HRB competency register for structural engineers. Go into that in detail. Process of application of acceptance to HRB register. And the summary is going to be a bit of a summary of going through all the things I've gone through this afternoon and giving you a chance to do a bit of a Q&A session at the end. So let's do the definition of terms from the outset. Okay, well, I'll slow down a little bit because we've got lots of time and we're going to have, thanks for the introduction of Human, by the way. It's very succinct and erudite. So definition of terms, let's do this, shall we? So first we have the building safety regulator. This is a government-funded body which is being run by the HSE that actually currently reviews applications for the construction and design of, design and construction and operation of HRBs, higher risk buildings. So they are a new body that came into existence in 2021. Ooh, wrong way, Chris. Sanctions. This is where you've actually some kind of not so much economic or political sanctions. These are legal sanctions. So if one has been subject to fines or criminal prosecutions or something similar, it's something in between, like civil actions, such as legal sort of civil legal actions being placed against one, that is regarded as a sanction. We'll go into details about what those sanctions are and why they're so important later. Competency statement. And this is a statement made by a construction professional, regardless of discipline, who's involved with the design of a building. Now, just to be clear, when I say building, I mean any building. That's because competency statements are actually required for all buildings, not just HRBs. Compliance statement. This is not the same as a competency statement. And in fact, I'm placing it here deliberately, knowing that this is probably the first and last time I make mention of the compliance statement, because compliance is actually demonstrating compliance with the functional requirements of the building regulations. It's not the same as competency at all. So it's like a follow-on. These two statements are required when submitting a building for Gateway 2 for HRBs, but it is not something we'll be talking about really much today. I just want to make it clear that there's a definite difference, because there's this distinct difference between these two statements. They are required for HRBs, but they are not required for all buildings. That's actually not true. You do need a compliance statement for all buildings as well. So that was wrong. Apologies, didn't mean to confuse everyone. That was wrong. So yes, do you need a competency statement? Do you need a compliance statement for all buildings? But Gateway 2 submissions, that kind of thing, don't apply to non-HRBs. That's very important, because there's no Gateway 2 for a non-HRB. So a high-risk building, what is that? A high-risk building is split into basically two kind of types. The first type is anything that's 7 stories or higher that has at least 2 residences. The stories are counted from the point of entry of the building. And the second type are old care homes and hospitals. They also are higher risk buildings. Out of scope building is anything that falls outside of what I just described. So a good example of this would be a train station or a commercial office block that's 20 stories high that only has any commercial development. There's no residents, no one living in the building. Therefore, that's out of scope. But it still has to have a competency statement, still has to have a compliance statement. Competency register. This is a relatively new invention, and it's something that the Engineering Council and the Institution of Structural Engineers, Institution of Civil Engineers have come up with for structural engineers, which I'll go into detail later on in this talk. UK spec annex. Well, maybe it's a kind of annex, but it's more of a bespoke set of competencies. Now, UK spec you may not be aware of, but you, as chartered engineers, those of you watching and listening to this who are incorporated engineers or chartered engineers, would have been subjected to what they call UK spec. And this is a list of, so we say, objectives or requirements or expected behaviours on the part of members of a professional institution, such as the Institution of Structural Engineers. And they lay down those, and this is all authored by the Engineering Council. Once you provide demonstration, you comply with all these objectives, key objectives. You might be familiar with those. Then you grant you a chartered or indeed incorporated status as an engineer, and that's where the UK spec comes from. And there's been another one, a contextualized list of UK specs, which I helped author back in 2022, which covers HRBs, what competencies are required for HRBs, and we're going to delve into that later on in this session. But yes, that's a UK spec. So it's an unknown phrase generally amongst most practicing engineers, and rightly so. It's not something you really should know about that much, but it is a fundamental sort of set of rules and sort of requirements that one would expect an incorporated or chartered engineer to know, and indeed a technician as well. So let's talk about the BSA requirement to prove one's competence. There's an image over there on the right-hand side of the screen, which is it's a standard. And this standard, which I kind of helped write the annexes to, not the main standard itself, this is BSA 670, which talks about competence frameworks. It's a rather loaded, complex document, and they tried to simplify as much as they could, but it's basically trying to address and trying to explain the method by which competence can be proven and how it's broken down. What do we mean by competence? And so this standard, which now exists, it used to be a flex, but now it's actually upgraded to the lofty status of standard. You can actually download it from, so it is behind a paywall, but if you're a member of the Institution of Structural Engineers, you actually have access to British standards because of your membership through that. If you don't know about that, do look up, and there's been lots of emails about it recently. So do take advantage of that. You do have access to the codes of practice as we speak, which is great. If you're a member, of course, which you probably are, because that's how you got into this talk anyway. The point being, this is a method which it's like a reaction to, because this standard was built as a reaction to the Building Safety Act. So let's not beat around the bush anymore. Let's talk about what the Building Safety Act actually requires us to demonstrate our ability to actually do what we claim we can do. So something called a duty holder, which I didn't do in terms of, is required to commission competent people and or organizations. So a duty holder is typically what you may refer to as the client or the building owner or the developer, not necessarily the funder, because that's a different thing entirely, but the client of the overall sort of top of the tree, if you like. That's the right word, maybe, but the actual originator of the project, the ones actually providing funds in order to build the thing, whatever we're building. So those duty holders then legally required under the Building Safety Act to commission people who are competent. Well, how do they do that? Well, therefore, anyway, they have to go to people and say, we need to prove that you are competent in the work that you claim you can do. So competence is proven via declarations made by those who are being commissioned. These are statements. Now, I work for MMP, as I've stated already, and we have two competency statements, one for HRBs and another for outside scope buildings, which is, perfectly valid thing to do. And I recommend those people, engineers who are working for practice, it's highly, highly likely that you have something similar, that you have one for two of types of buildings, and they are built around and created on the premise of what's required under the Building Safety Act. It's very carefully written and reviewed multiple times. These declarations must assert that the commissioned construction expert professional has not been sanctioned, there's that word, within the last 5 years. I'm going to talk about what we mean by sanctioned, but that period is also important. So within the last 5 years, no one involved or proposed to be involved with the design and development of a building project can be sanctioned within the last 5 years. So it could be both organisation and individuals. It's an important point. Competence declarations include promised behaviours in relation to complying with the requirements of the Building Safety Act and detailed lists of personnel who will be involved with the project. So while in the contract, you might sort of say, yes, we're going to have this list of people potentially involved with the project. It's difficult to actually lock that down. But when you're dealing with a competence statement, you have to be pretty sure that the people involved with it are going to be the people involved with the project. So, and that's an important point we come back to when we talk about registers, because it's at this point in your declaration, your competence declaration, that you state if there's anyone on the roster of people working on a project, especially the lead engineer or the project manager, call them what you will, if they are a registrant of the register, of the HRB register, if they're on that register, this is where you put it. This is where you state it. Why is that important? Well, hopefully it'll explain, that'll be all come clear later on in this session. But I just wanted to hold that thought for the moment. If you're on a register, if a member of staff's on the register, and the team leader or the team, someone involved with the project is actually going to be on the register, you need to advertise it at this point, because it answers a lot of questions on the part of the duty holder, a lot of questions, and it also short circuits this following point. The following point being listed personnel must have relevant technical CVs to demonstrate their experience of a particular building form. What do I mean by technical? Well, many of us work, not say all, that's wrong, because there's 500 of you, which I'm kind of intimidated by, but let's move on. Some of us, vast majority of us, work for private practices, I'm assuming. Maybe not, but just park that for a moment. As a private practice, I can vouch that we have CVs on file for all staff members when going for bidding for work, yes, marketing purposes. Those CVs aren't very good for this kind of thing, because they don't really talk about in great detail what technically we do. Not enough detail anyway, in many cases. It's quite common, I've found, building safety regulators, or indeed principal designers, I should say, so principal designers have said the CV isn't good enough, it's not detailed enough, it doesn't break it down into exactly what you technically did as an engineer on this project. I fully grant you worked on this project, that's great, and it's relevant, it's an HRB, that's wonderful. But what did you do? So because they want to know what your competence is, and competence comes with relevant qualifications, absolutely, but also experience. The quality of that experience as well. They want to measure the quality of experience. They can't do that if the CV is a little bit light on detail. We've all been there, and that's fine. So I'm afraid that we've had, as a practice, had to go back into our CVs and review them and actually create two types, one for technical and one for marketing. And that's fine. It's effort, it's extra effort, but I think it's worthwhile. But now here's the key. If one of your staff members is a member or registrant on the register, this is kind of a nice thing to have, but it's the register adds far more weight than a CV would, far more weight. And I'll explain why later, but it will. So having that in place and having a registrant as your roster of people working on the project is a big deal. It's very good. Basically it is in the interests of the duty holder to commission people who have registrants in their staff, in their team, because it de-risks a lot of things. It answers a lot of questions they have in terms of competence. And as I go through that process with you in a moment, this should actually come clear. So let's move on. So a list of sanctions then. I'm going to go through these. These are all the sanctions that one must avoid within the last 5 years if you are deemed to be competent. I also worthy there. But I'm going to maybe worthy is a good idea. A good word, I don't know. But if you're deemed to be competent to actually work on this, we've got a question. Okay. The question about building and structure. Okay, when I talk about building, And I'm not actually switching. I'm going to come back to sanctions in a minute. Thank you for the input. I'm talking about not civil engineering works. I say that deliberately. So when I say a structure, you could argue a tunnel is a structure, a bridge is a structure, a airport is a structure. That's a bad example, but so I'm not talking about civil engineering. So when I say building, I mean a building with floors in it which one occupies. It could be a laboratory, it could be a bank, it could be a commercial development, it could be a mixed-use development, it could be a shopping mall, but that is still a building. So that's when I say building. But when I'm talking about the infrastructure works, such as marine works, marine defences, and that kind of thing, I'm not talking about those. That's a separate issue entirely. So anyway, but thanks for that. Thank you for the alerting that point. Now, sanctions. These are the sanctions one must avoid. Let's have a look. Issue and compliance notice referred to contravention. So issue of a compliance notice, which referred to contravention of Part A, structural failure, Part B, Schedule 1 of the building regulations. So if you undermine the issue of so you fail to issue or you fail to comply with either of these parts of the building regulations, that regarded will be a sanction. Issue of a stop notice in relation to contravention of any requirement of or imposed under the building regulations. So if you design something or your actions led to the non-compliance of a building regulations, then that's a sanctionable act. Conviction of any offence under the Building Safety Act 2022, Building Act 1984, or the Registry Reform, Fire Safety Order 2005. So if you're actually convicted under any of those acts, that would be regarded as a sanctionable offence and therefore should need to be reported. And conviction of offence under the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 or Construction Design and Management Regulations 2015. So if anything under CDM or Health and Safety Work Act, which are kind of linked together, more than kind of, they are linked together, then yeah, that's a sanctionable act. A finding by a formal inquiry of behaviour that directly results in loss of life, the deliberate misleading of customers or counted to the failure to meet regulatory requirements. This kind of thing, this wording is actually lifted from the Act itself. That's why it's all a bit convoluted. But these 5 points, you need to have this in your competence statement. You need to state that in the last 5 years, no one involved with this project or no one who will be involved with this project has ever been sanctioned under these particular 5 points. Okay, within the last 5 years. This must be put into a statement, any competence statement. You need to list all of these. Now, it's quite common, I've found, that a lot of principal designers, rather than requesting a statement from us, from the practice directly, or they actually send you a form to fill out. And one of the part of the form will say, could please confirm you're not being sanctioned under the list of items listed here. It's the same list here. It's all the same. We all have to comply with that. And this is basically one of the ways you actually demonstrate competence, that we haven't actually been sanctioned against any of these points, which is kind of reasonable, really, if you think about it. But anyway, so let's talk about what I've banged on about earlier. The HRB Competency Register. Now, this was soft launched earlier this year and early February by the Institution of Structural Engineers and the Institution of Civil Engineers. Now, before I go on to about this, full transparency. This is something you need to know about me personally. I do have a vested and personal interest in this because I am the chair of the committee that creates the register. So I'm a chair of the ICI joint HRB structures competency register. So I have a vested interest in this. But what I'm about to reveal to you, I'm very close to, because I'm actually administering it, helping it happen along with all the other committee members, which is split into both ICE and iStrut team members. And again, another piece of false transparency. I am a member of both institutions. In fact, the chair of this committee must be a member of both institutions. So with that out of the way, let's go into the detail. So the purpose of HRB Competency Structures Register is to prove to duty holders, as defined in the Building Safety Act, that those they commission as structural engineers are competent. Apologies, I did say that rather quickly, but it's basically saying that if you're on this register and you've actually managed to get onto this register, and you can then really confidently demonstrate to a duty holder that you are competent to work on higher risk buildings. Really? How's that then? Well, it's a bit much, isn't it? I suppose it is, but let's talk about what the register is. And as I flesh it out, that will probably reveal more to you. Like, oh, okay, I get it. That's why. So, proof of competency requirements are defined within Regulation 11F of the Building Amendment England Regulations 2023. So that's a very good point, actually. And if this hasn't been raised before, I'm kind of frustrated it hasn't been raised yet until now. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the Building Safety Regulator only covers England. That's right. Not Wales, not Scotland, not Northern Ireland, just England. Building Safety Regulator only covers England. All the other nations of the United Kingdom have their own devolved sort of parliaments and authorities, and they're dealing with it their own way. So that's why it's Building Amendment England Regulations 2023. But the compliance, competency statements are still hold true. Regulation 11F of the Building Safety Act underlines that. Oh, sorry, the building regulations. Sorry, apologies. So the ICE and iStruct are working collaboratively to support the process of admitting registrants to the HRB structures, which we are currently doing that very thing. Decisions pertaining to the HRB structures register will be taken through the ICE iStruct HRB Joint Committee. Yes, I see the questions popping up. We'll loop back to them. I'm in full flow, but I am acknowledging them. But thank you for the feedback. Thank you for the interaction. I appreciate it. It means I'm not talking into a void. Anyway, decisions pertaining to the HRB. So the committee is going to make decisions. They are making decisions at the moment. I can tell you right hot off the press that we're currently looking at incorporated engineers and engineering technicians as part of the registration process as well. Anyway, let's move on. IC and iStruct nominate members of joint committee, which we have, with the chair holding membership of both institutions, which I am. Okay. The Secretariat support the committee in operation administration activities of the register are provided by the iStruct. So while this is a joint venture and funded by both the ICE and iStruct and the Engineering Council, the administration of it is being dealt with by the institution of structural engineers. So all your applications, if you're ICE or iStruct member, you still go through the iStruct to be on the register. Okay. Which, by the way, is over and above. Sorry, that's not true. Over and above, wrong. It's an adjacent to, or an adjunct to, or bolt on, if you like, to your engineering council membership that you currently have. So if you're incorporated or chartered or engineering technician registered with the engineering council, that's one thing. This thing is an addition to. Okay, so it's this registration thing it's an addition to, which is good. So how do you become a registrant? Well, there's currently only one route to become HRB structure, and it's called the standard pathway. And this part, I want to listen to very, very carefully because there's some very strict requirements in order to even be considered to be on the register. This is not that horrible phrase of gatekeeping. This is about making sure that the people who actually do apply to be on a register are competent in the first place. We don't want to waste everyone's time. So that's where this is coming from. It's coming from a certain place saying, because we're asking a rather blunt question, you're a chartered engineer. Great, good stuff. But are you competent in working on higher risk buildings? Now, you may argue it's not a reasonable question to ask, but I think it really is a reasonable question to ask because many of us work on very broad range of buildings. I personally have worked on all sorts of things over my career. So to ask that question, is it possible to ask that question? Are you competent to work on this particular type of building? And that's where this all comes in. So Applicants will need to hold a current ICE, I-Struct-T membership with 5 years post-registered chartered experience. So, although they may not hold current registration, that's a legal point, but you have to have post 5 years experience of being qualified in some way, professionally qualified, either with the ICE or the I-Struct-T. It's a very important point. Applicants undergo a professional review interview against the UK spec HRB Structures Annex competencies, which is supported by the submission of a portfolio of evidence. That's right, you have to go for your PRI again. But this is a different thing. This is against the specific set of competencies, which I'm going to explain later. But this point is really important because it means that if you, in order to get on the register, you have to be independently reviewed by your peers, by people who do not know you, you don't work with, there's no personal relations with at all, which means you're actually being interviewed and being quizzed and examined and reviewed by those who are not personally involved with. And that's important to note. And that's why it carries so much weight, because if a client or duty holder, I should say, the duty holder knows this, they know that you've been reviewed independently by your peers and found that you are competent. They say, yes, they know what they're doing. That means a lot. Okay, so successful registrants will renew their certification every 5 years. That's right. That's right. That's a really important thing. This renewal thing of every 5 years was quite insistent. It's very, very important this is the case. And the renewal process, we haven't actually ratified this yet because we've got a handful of people that are registrants at the moment. So once it starts building momentum, we get more and more people on board. Then we have to start as a committee. I say we, as chair and as a committee, let's figure out a way about how we're going to do this renewal process. It's not unknown. This is done in many other countries as well, about renewing one's license, renewing one's bit of competence. But why this? Why HRBs? Well, the reason being is just so you know, this demonstrate that you've kept up with current technology, kept up your CPD, you kept up, and also more to the point, between the time you became a registrant and the time that you actually want to renew, there may be a situation where you've stopped working on HRBs. So what then? Well, in that case, you probably want to renew anyway. Let's say I moved on and started working on airports exclusively. Let's say, yeah, my chairmanship of the committee would be up for question. But the point being, it's your life changes, things change. But principally, this is really making sure that people working on these things are who they say they are. So let's move on. The following forms are required to be sent to the I-Struct-T. So these are the things you need to send to us. Okay, lots of questions. This is great. I will answer them at the end. Thank you. You need an application form. Simple thing. Nothing. There's no sponsorship on the application form, by the way. You just send the application form. Abridged CVs showing relevant HRB related experience. So you have to show specifically what kind of work you're working on. Kind of work you're working on. Sorry, I get distracted by things. What kind of projects you're working on, which are relevant to HRBs, yeah? Just to make sure you've actually got experience in that. Assessment reports, 5 assessment reports, all 2 pages long, just 2 pages, 2 A4 pages, all of them showing that your competencies against the 5 key objectives, AA to EE. I won't go into detail about what those objectives are, otherwise this course will go on for 2 hours, which we can't do. So the application fee is £200, but you can claim on expenses, and it's tax deductible. It's fine. It's fine. And you need a portfolio of evidence. Now, the way this works, bit of a tip here. You write your UK spec. You write your reports, your 5 reports, right? And in those reports, you're going to make claims. It's fine. It's fine, because you make claims about what you can do and how you've done things and such and such. But if you made a claim, then you need to back it up with evidence. And the way you back it up with evidence is you refer to what's in your portfolio. Okay, so you've got your portfolio, you've got your pile of documents, virtual pile of documents, and then you just say, well, I did this, and I did this, and this is the drawing, and this is the specification, or whatever you that I see, like demonstrated that I did the thing, I did the thing, I do the thing. So that's how it works. That's the reciprocal nature of it. So you write the reports first, and once you write reports, then you build a portfolio up. On average, I think this is about maybe 5 days work, I reckon, tops, if it's just going non-stop. So if you split that over a period of weeks, it's not a small amount of work. I'm not going to play it down, but it's still an effort required. Again, the fact that you've done all of this, it helps with the duty holders, it helps with those who are commissioning you. So that's the feedback loop, is you're spending all this effort to do this thing. For what? That's a reasonable question. For what? Well, is to actually say that you are competent in this, and those who employ you are confident, should be confident in that fact. In summary, then, we are now the confidence of the built environment industry. Some people call it the construction industry, but if you do that, then you're lumping everything else in, like tunnels and bridges and what have you. I like to call it the built environment industry, the one that I work in. I have been working for most of my career, probably 90% of my career. Built environment industry is under siege by the public, by the government. Ever since Grenfell fire in 2017, they basically looked around and goes, "Hey, how did this happen? This is horrible. Why has this happened?" And now, ever since, and then the inquiry reports come out, and even more reports, more inquiries, commentary on inquiries, all sorts of things are coming in, and they're coming to the fore, and they're saying, looking at us and saying, "You've not done what you're supposed to do. What are you playing at? Why aren't you building and designing buildings that are safe to operate in, and safe to exist in, and safe to use? What's going on? What are you playing at? Why are you blaming each other, not actually coming up with a solution?" This is what this is about. This is why we're now having to defend ourselves, I'm afraid, and say, yeah, we do know what we're doing. We totally do. Well, if that's the case, then why did that disaster occur in the first place? And this is one of the ways we actually answer that question. In fact, this second session, if you ever want to know why all this is happening, it's because of that. Why the Building Safety Act exists, it's because of that. It's because the way the industry becomes so fragmented and indeed litigious, to the point of being working in silos to protect themselves from each other, has led to this disaster. There's a whole different philosophical discussion on that. It's probably not the platform or place to do it, but that's where we're at. That's why we are where we are.